The main question about the Xi-Trump meeting is whether Xi will agree to give up Russia. Well, or a continuation. Or will he go to war, even if it's a trade war, any kind of war? But we're already showing our teeth, so a trade war could easily turn into something completely different. For the past 3 days, I've been getting sarcastic, I would say, comments from, well, somewhat dim-witted, I guess, Democrats, as I imagine them, or just foolish people about the fact that Xi wasn't removed. And he's going there in all his glory, meaning to pin the petty, foolish, thieving Trump flat on his back. But the rumors about my supposed mistake, gentlemen, are somewhat exaggerated. Before the party's Central Committee. So, events occurred that truly shook all of China. 8 major military commanders were dismissed, and most of them were actually promoted by Xi himself. Even the vice chairman of China's Defense Council was dismissed, which is unprecedented in the Middle Kingdom, because without Xi, he couldn't have been there, sitting in that position. So opinions in China are actually divided. Some believe that this is Xi striking at his own people so that outsiders will be afraid. Well, that is, he shows that for the slightest, so to speak, suspicion of stepping out of line, there will be a shooting. That's it. Well, so to speak, a shooting, God knows. But they will be removed and thrown in prison. So, in the universe of Korea, when the leader suspects you of disloyalty, they strip you naked, cover you in grease, and throw you to hungry dogs. And your children, wives, and other household members are forced to watch as you are torn apart. This happened multiple times. That's why I calmly say that's how things are done there now. Or maybe it's always been that way. That's it. I don't know what they do in China, but I suspect it's also something unpleasant for those suspected of malfunctioning. Well, it's clear that there's some kind of, struggle for influence, a struggle for power between the party leadership and the army. And it's still completely unclear who's winning. After the plenum, China suddenly announced readiness for negotiations. But with whom? With the United States, of course. At the same time, by tightening its stance on minerals and rare earth metals, practically all of which, 90% of these so-called rare earths, as they're called in Russian, are under the control of the Chinese communists. So, according to experts, it will take the United States about 5 to 10 years to free itself from this dependence. I listen to and read what others say because I don't understand this myself. So it will take time to completely replace Chinese suppliers with, say, Japanese, Australian, or African ones. That is, there is something in Greenland and there is something in Latin America. But for America, full-scale supplies from China are necessary. And over the next 5 years, let's say, it probably won't change much, but then in about 4 or 5 years, it will gradually start to decrease proportionally. And some say in 7 years, others say in 10 years, it means that practically we will need 0 years. It doesn't mean we won't be buying, but we will need 0 from China. The United States still depends on China more than China depends on the United States, which makes Trump's position vulnerable. But it seems that the Central Committee of the Chinese Party has instructed Xi Tai to seek reconciliation with the United States, not to escalate the conflict. Trump has now added 100% tariffs on China, bringing the average tariff on Chinese goods to, if I'm not mistaken, 155%. This, of course, kills Chinese exports, but supplying the necessary elements to the United States and Europe could have led to harsh measures against China by the United Front. That's the United States, Canada, the European Union, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. Who else is making anything out of them? Well, and a number of other countries that are in close proximity to China. China can raise its coalition, which it has already assembled, but its coalition is a coalition of suppliers, and these suppliers are specifically to those countries with whom China is going to engage in conflict, or at least has tried to engage in conflict. We don't know right now. Let's see what happens on October 31st. And right after the Central Committee plenum, China proposed lifting export restrictions on elements needed by the United States, and the United States agreed that it would then lift the additional 100% tariffs that Trump announced just recently. Having received new powers, it was kind of confirmed, because there were rumors that it wouldn't happen, a meeting with Trump in South Korea. And during the negotiations, it will be decided what each country can sacrifice for the sake of a truce. China has a window of 5 to 10 years to put pressure on the United States. This is what I told you about rare earth metals and replacing suppliers. They can, of course, count on 3 years of Trump. Now they'll elect him, so they won't have him. Well, now they'll elect him. Second term, he won't be there anymore. But instead of him, well, let's say Vance or someone from his team could come and continue the same policy. So they can't count on just waiting out these 3 years and then things will get better. Trump has already shown that he's ready to deploy troops, in this case, the Navy. And if this can solve the problem that, so to speak, has arisen in the United States because of a country that's acting not very friendly, there's an armada off the coast of Venezuela, I would say. I wanted to say a squadron, but I changed it to armada, which shows that this is about much more than just fighting drug dealers' boats. This is being shown to the world in China. Naturally, first and foremost, that there's a person sitting in the White House who perceives America. For me, the most important thing is literally, well, quite literally. The fleet in the Caribbean Sea could end up in the South China Sea if our access to the resources needed by our army and our industry is cut off. Let me remind you that in 1941, Japan began military operations against the United States. I might be off by about 6 months, but I think it was in 1941. In 1939, Japan was actively seizing parts of Indochina, and the United States demanded that these seizures stop. Do you remember the Monroe Doctrine? As I mentioned, Japan didn't agree, and the United States imposed an oil embargo. Where was Japan getting its oil from? Mainly from the United States. Also, there was an embargo on scrap metal. We exported large amounts of scrap metal and iron there. This forced Japan to attack the United States because otherwise Japan's industry would have stopped, and, so to speak, the army would have been left without resources. Mobility would have stopped, tanks couldn't move, and ships would have nothing to power them. I'm not sure what powered their ships then, but I suspect it was the same as others. Now it's the same situation between the United States and China. But in this case, the United States depends on supplies of Chinese minerals and medicines. By the way, antibiotics are an example of that too. I talked about this about half a year ago. And China understands that America won't let its military and electronics industries suffocate and die. So, besides the Navy, meaning the demonstration that we'll use force if necessary, the United States has surrounded China with its allies. Well, it's not difficult because Well, it's both difficult and not difficult because China has become very aggressive lately. In the past 15-20 years, unlike its 4,000-5,000 year history, and the neighbors are getting nervous. So in Kuala Lumpur, that's where Trump was until yesterday. Mutual assistance agreements have been signed with Malaysia. In Russian, I think it's Malaysia, yes, Thailand, respectively, Cambodia, and Vietnam. With Vietnam, there were already agreements. Now they're just strengthened, so to speak, with all sorts of increases and so on. South Korea and Japan have signed new expanded commitments with the United States. And Japan is transferring $550 billion. So they were collecting $400, but Trump pushed them, gave Trump $550 billion for him to invest. And what's really interesting is that he invested it wherever he thought it was beneficial for the United States, and he would keep getting returns. That's complete fiction. 90% of the profits from that money will go to the United States and 10% to the Japanese. So what to be continued? In this way, Trump forced Japan to restore the trade balance. In addition, he's signed agreements that should eliminate this imbalance in the future. So, guys, you'll have to pay for your not-so-good behavior, for not letting our cars into your market, and so on and so forth. So, they offered 300, then 400. We said, okay, but now we said no, actually 550 is too little. Basically, they're giving us 550 billion of the money that Japan made off of us so that we can invest it in development. They'll naturally benefit from the results. Because Trump plans to invest in artificial intelligence electricity for artificial intelligence and developing various artificial intelligence-related devices, as I understand it. In general, artificial intelligence stands for artificial intelligence. In Russian, it's called IISO. That's all. We have no more complaints against you. You have, so to speak, paid for your bad behavior. And now, guys, let's live in peace and, so to speak, well, at least honestly. All these countries that I mentioned can export goods to the United States, gradually replacing Indian and Chinese products. Why? So, in the countries that are now cooperating with the United States against that coalition, there are 600 million people living. This will allow them to compete with China and India if necessary. So with China, definitely with Japan, and with India if necessary. Japan and South Korea have the technologies, all the technologies that are needed. The others have cheap labor, and in general, everything there is quite inexpensive, so to speak. Water and this and that, everything and so on and so forth. With low tariffs, we'll still impose a 10% charge on all incoming goods because we need to. To get rid of this terrible Marxist-Leninist idea that, so to speak, you have to basically collect money from citizens, take it away, steal it whenever you can. Trump wants to destroy all of this and replace almost everything with tariffs. For now, we don't know if he will succeed or not. Maybe it won't work out in 3 years, but in 6, 7, or 8 years with the next administration, things might settle down. We'll see. In any case, this is a great movement. Part of our taxes will be replaced by import tariffs and so on. But all these countries, again, 600 million people will be able to supply us with products here with a 10% tariff. In India and China, they will supply at 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, etc. That means they will clearly be in a more advantageous position, taking more and more of the market from us here in America. I think, at least in India and Britain, I am certain. And possibly the European Union, if it survives, will follow suit. This means that in 5 to 10 years, China will not have a strategic leverage. Well, mainly these are rare earth medicines, with which they are practically blackmailing the world today. Well, blackmailing is, so to speak, a harsh word. Yes, but really they're focused on winning their own game and doing everything they can. They're not shooting at us, just saying, buy it if you want, or don't. That's something that should have been considered earlier. Like Ukraine and Russia, they didn't think, and then Russia attacked. They should have thought ahead. So that's why China will do something during this period so it doesn't end up without any trump cards. What that is, we don't know. So if the Z faction wins, well, that's the party bureaucracy, let's say, then we in China, America, and China will be measuring who's bigger. Sorry for my French-Spanish language. Can it lead to war? By the way, I hope it's not nuclear, but more like some kind of naval conflict, right? If the faction wins or has won, well, they call it the Elder, the Communist Party, so to speak again. There's a whole group of people who have joined together, right? And together with the army leadership, by the way, they seem to be united now. Then we can expect extensive negotiations with the United States concessions from the United States, and accordingly, concessions from Trump. And possibly China refusing to sponsor Russia, because that will be one of the demands Trump will make. Now, on the very last day of October in Seoul, yes, I think it was in South Korea, definitely, maybe in Seoul. This is now being actively discussed in the Kremlin, and I think it will be, let's say, the #1 news story in the foreseeable future, not only in the Kremlin, but all around the world. Which path has Kitai decided to take? Confrontation or, well, give in here, give in there. Game competition actually suits us well. So it's either a confrontation or a competition. So we're moving toward, well, a resolution. Not even a resolution, but an understanding of what, so to speak, China will do, what China has chosen, because they already know, but we don't know yet. The ball, as they say in America, is in their court, and we are, so to speak, in a waiting mode. Do you want confirmation of my words straight from the mouth of the Rulavoi? I didn't say the helmsman, if you noticed.
And unlike previous administrations, we won't be politically correct. You don't mind that, do you? When it comes to defending the United States, we will no longer be politically correct. We will defend our country by any means necessary, and that is usually not a politically correct way. From now on, if we go to war, we will win like never before. You know, we went in, we destroyed countries we shouldn't have gone in.
So who do you think Trump is saying all this to? I think the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. Of course, they don't have any other party there. And at the same time, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela with Colombia, and not at all to the assembled soldiers, for whom a couple of jokes would have been much more interesting and important, but keynote speeches are delivered at, who's there, Venezuela? A battleship, an aircraft carrier, a cruiser. Mita carries, God knows, something big, iron, and very dangerous. That's where keynote speeches are delivered. If we go to war with Venezuela, if we're pushed to the point where we go to war, we'll be the editor. We'll hit back hard, said Trump, with all our might. We won't be joking. We'll fight to win. God forbid it starts, but if we fight, we'll fight to win. And we, quoting Trump, will win in a way no one ever dreamed of. What does it mean? I swear I don't know, but it's very funny. So let's see what October 30th on the eve of Halloween. October 30th. Halloween, the last day of October. What will October 30th bring us? And the last thing I want to say is, hail to the chief.